Oh gosh. Okay. Phantasy Star 3 is a game that gets quite a bit of hate from both the Phantasy Star community and the broader gaming community at large, but the goal of this series is to appreciate each title no matter what. The goal is not to make a hate video. Many of the titles of this series have enough of those already. Phantasy Star 3 would be chief among them were it not for New Genesis. This is going to be hard. So the format for this one is going to be a lot like the Phantasy Star 1 video, where I'm basically making a journal detailing my way through the game on my own time. Well, before that, let me explain my personal history with the game. I first interacted with this game because of the Genesis and Mega Drive Classics collection on the Nintendo Switch. I had enjoyed Phantasy Star 2 to the point I had played at the time, which I think was around the Mario era gum bit. So I wanted to see the opening moments of 3 and 4 on the collection to see how they compared. I remember the first thing that hit me about Phantasy Star 3 was that it seemed like a downgrade in a lot of ways. The art style seems more generic, the menu seems to load a different scene, and it feels kind of clunky to use. The font choice looks worse, the music sounds worse, and that was my first impression of the game. It was basically just, oh, this looks worse than the last game. Why? A large part of that is that why is that Phantasy Star 3 was made by a different team than 1, 2, and 4. The composer specifically had only been at Sega for 2 years at the time, and there was only one designer for the game, Hirondo Saiki, who I've read is the only member of 3's team to have been part of 2's development. The game is rather ambitious given the state of its development team, and apparently we only got a fraction of the ideas, as the scale of the game world and branching narrative paths was really pushing the memory limits of the Genesis. So a lot of the narrative got scrapped, as well as an idea to have the music change based on the party apparently. Basically everything I could find about on how the developers felt about the project described it as challenging and fatiguing, which, given that the developers are Japanese, so they have a bit of a culture around there, around both downplaying their own hardships and needlessly overworking themselves. That could mean anything up to and including, I thought I might not survive to see the end of this project. So who really knows what sort of situation ended up creating this game? Now, with all this negative energy, the journal begins on... So, admittedly, I didn't have much time to play when I decided to start this game. The opening scroll is a little hard to read, not a fan of the font here, but what I did manage to read told me this has less than nothing to do with the other games, and given what I know about how none of the staff of the other games were really involved here, I think that was on purpose. Anyway, after that we get dropped into town, walking around and talking to people. The confirm button is the menu button, and I've been playing Phantasy Star 4 as I started this, so that's gonna trip me up. Anyway, once I've figured out which buttons talk, I talk to people in town. Apparently, I'm Prince Reese, and I'm getting married to some girl named Maya. Who is she? No one knows, including Maya herself, it seems. Well, right as the vows are to be made, Maya's taken away by a dragon. That's certainly an exciting way to start the game. I'm glad that didn't happen at my wedding. Of course, Reese is immediately pissed and states that he's going to take the army to find Maya. If I squint here, I think I see an alternate reality where this turns into a Fire Emblem game. But alas, the king disagrees and throws his son into the dungeon. I've heard of parents who have harsh groundings, but damn. In jail, there are 3 chests, including a knife, and probably the best part of this game over Phantasy Star 2, the monitor. It's a map screen. It shows you where you are in the world. That's nice. After getting the items, there's a lady at the door who breaks us out. With that, we set out upon the world with a little more direction than find Maya, wherever she is. For now, I just kind of wander around fighting enemies until I make it to the next town, where there's an old man who refuses to travel unless a cyborg is on the ship, which... yeah, okay, sure, why not? It's here now where I run into a small issue. I used the inn, saved, and closed the game, presuming myself to be healed when I open the game next. only to go into battle and be met with a surprise that I, in fact, still had 6 HP. In my confusion, I used all the monomates I had, only to find they did nothing as well. I was so frustrated here that I almost put the game down entirely. Then I noticed the P above Reese's name. Poison? But I haven't been taking any damage from walking around. Yet turns out, poison in Phantasy Star 3 means no healing from anywhere at all. So I buy some antidotes to cure Reese. I knew there was a poison healer somewhere, but I kind of forgot when I went and did this. Sure enough, I could heal after that. Great! With that mystery solved, I wander around some more, hoping to find a cyborg. In the next town, I find someone who says they saw someone to the northeast who didn't blink. Sounds like a robot to me! I make my way out there to find Miu, who I can't help but think the name is meant to invoke Meow, the second party member of the first game. Miu is a combat android who obeys descendants of Arachio, which, conveniently, includes Reese here. Unlike the sequel to this game, Miu can use techs, despite being a robot. In fact, she has a lot of them right off the bat, and Reese doesn't have any. Interesting. Weird, but interesting. I went back and talked to the old man. His ship took me to a cave on an island, though stopping to mention that Dark Falls was apparently sealed under the water. That's not how I remember it going down in Phantasy Star 2. It was only once I entered the cave that I realized I had forgotten to heal before getting on the boat. I also noticed that poison is also really common in this game, which is very different from other games in the quadrilogy, and I don't think that's a good thing here. Anyway, I picked up the play session here late at night because I couldn't sleep, so once a couple battles into the cave, I made a save state and went to bed. I next played the game on the 15th. When I came back, I was worried I may have screwed myself, as both of my party members were poisoned and Miu had no TP left. Luckily, you could just go back on the old man's boat, so I did, went back and healed. Then I learned that the old man tells you about Dark Falls every time you go to the island. That's fun. Luckily, you don't really have to do that too often. Anyway, in the cave we find Lyle, who says he wants to come with us, but he's busy. Okay. And then he gives us the sapphire. Cool. Why do I need this? I'll have to figure it out. On the way back, Miu dies. This wouldn't matter for the most part, because this is how I found out that apparently, in Phantasy Star 3, dying does not absolve you of being poisoned. Being revived costs 50%, but they won't even spare an antidote when they do it. Cheapskates. Also, since this was the first time I had to heal someone with TP, this is how I found out that poison prevents healing TP as well. My biggest complaint about the game right now is poison. I hate this status ailment, dude. Who the hell thought of this thing, dude? Now, before heading out to find out what I could do with the sapphire, I went to the technique place to mess with that. I'm gonna be honest, I have no clue what this is about, in the least. Changing it appears to have changed my MP costs, maybe? I don't know. Well, with that done and thoroughly confused, I set out to find out what I could do with the sapphire. Using the monitor, I could figure out that there aren't terribly many options, just 2 places I haven't been to that I can access right now. The first is some sort of palace, apparently, that only lions are meant to be in. Lions? I don't know. No idea. So we're kicked out. The other is a cave I needed the sapphire for. Except, hello? This isn't a cave at all. This is some weird sci-fi plumbing system or something. The enemies in here are real tough, and wouldn't you know it, they inflict poison. Well, Reese was getting low on HP, so I went to use Anti to cure it, and... Anti can just... not work? Who designed this nonsense? Why would you go out of your way to make such a frustrating system? I had to use Anti 4 times to cure the 1 poison. I had planned to heal with Resta afterward, but no, I can't do that because now I'm used out of TP from using Anti. So I had to tuck my tail between my legs and run back to town. It is on this run back to town that I realized something else that's strange about this game. Encounters are predetermined. If you look at my playthroughs of Phantasy Star 2 and 4, you'll see that I am able to cheat by rewinding time to reroll random encounters. I can't do that in 3. No matter what, I get an encounter in the same number of steps. That's certainly something. It's probably going to bother me a lot as this game goes on. After healing up, I save the game and shut it, ending my play for that day, having to leave home afterward. This has left me time to ruminate and write about some of the small things that are just kind of add up to a more negative experience this game compared to Phantasy Star 2. This starts at the menus. In Phantasy Star 2, the menus are easy to get to, appear on the same screen over the map, and has all the information in single chunks at the same location on the screen, which means your eyes don't have to travel too much to see everything you need to, and you can get into and out of the menus with ease. Phantasy Star 3 has this abomination that I mentioned at the start of the video, and I seem to be that the menus seem to need to load, and while having played for a bit, I don't think it's quite a loading thing, but it is slow, because it fades out from the map, and it opens to this screen, and to exit it fades back out to the game. But that's not my only issue with this menu design. My real gripe is just how all over the place information is. Let's go to the equipment screen, for example. The inventory here is on the top right, and the list of what is equipped is on the top left, but the stats are on the bottom right. So comparing equipment requires you to move your eyes all over the screen, which may not sound like a big deal, but menus like this are basically 1/3 of an RPG experience. The separate character inventories have returned in this game, but the presentation of them is also split into these windows for some reason, while the inventory of the equip menu has the next button on it. Overall, the menus just have a lot of baffling design choices. It appears to be in favor of putting the character portraits in the menu, which is neat, but like, Phantasy Star 2 had a solution for this, the status screen. Oh, god damn it, I said I didn't want this to be a hate video. Think of something this game actually improves on from 2. Got it. The battle system. Phantasy Star 3 takes some of the ideas of PS2's combat and reins it in just a bit, giving players the option to run a single turn instead of the entire battle, which is helpful for doing things like healing or whatnot. The picture-based battle UI is a little juvenile. I read somewhere that it was inspired by the Shining series, which I've only played the first Shining Force game. Yeah, I could definitely see the relation. Battle backgrounds return after the grid in 2, which is nice, even though, honestly, I actually like the grid in 2. It was very clean and gave off a very Tron sort of sci-fi vibe. The last thing I'll add to say about the battle system is that you can adjust the speed of battle messages on startup of the game. That's very nice. I wish you could change it mid-game, but we can't have everything. This is still a Genesis game we're talking about. Now, some things that are different about battles in this game, but isn't exactly better, strictly speaking, is the music. PS3 has this pre-battle music, which to me is reminiscent of like an SMT game, but instead of those games, they use a slow ambient track to give atmosphere to the encounter and let you think before tensions escalate. This game has this somewhat grating pattern of notes. It is a truly unpleasant way to start a battle. Once battle begins, there is this like weird selection of different pieces of music. The one is this lighthearted, fun-sounding track, and the other is this incredibly melodramatic organ piece. I have no clue which causes which track to play. It seems to change each turn. It's just weird. It's not really better, but I'm not gonna call it worse than Phantasy Star 2, because this seems entirely subjective. It comes down to whether or not you like the tracks. I personally think they're both kind of bland, but the organ track specifically feels exceptionally dramatic, so I think it's fun. With all that said, it was in fact a distraction because I didn't touch the game again until... Okay, yeah, not exactly a massive gap in play, but I would like to get this video out sometime this year. So I made it through the Techno Cave to, Desolus? Okay, I'm gonna be honest. I already know the twist of this game. I beat Phantasy Star 4 a few days ago at the time of writing. I'm well aware that these aren't planets. Point is, it's snowy here. I wander around for a bit, then decide to open the monitor to see where things might be. Turns out the monitor doesn't add dots for locations in other overworld sections. It's just that first one, I guess. That bites. Couldn't figure out where to go, and I set the game down again, saying next time I played, I might have to look up a guide. And look up a guide I did. Boy, am I glad I did so, because the entrance to move forward is to walk down from this random ruined building into an unmarked square. Yeah, okay, how in Algo was I meant to find this? This genuinely feels like one of the choices made by a developer that works part-time at a company that makes game guides. It's evil and it makes no sense. Anyway, on the other side, we wind up in a desert that has very little in it for landmarks. So I guess we're going for like a sort of analogous to the 3 planets of Algo, but like they're connected by weird techno tunnels. The last part of the guide I consulted briefly said that there was a town down by the singular river in the southern part of this area, so I made my way over there. It was on my way down this way that I recalled a quote I had read about this game. It was something to the effect that the developers cut the story segments in order to fit their massive world, and I'm realizing the previous games did a lot more with a lot less, it seems. I mentioned in my Phantasy Star 1 video that none of the planet maps are actually all that big. It's just that you have to make detours all the time. That makes it feel like a very large, realized world, which is very smart for the Master System. Although, maybe giving us the ability to fly wasn't as smart of an idea on their part in that game. Phantasy Star 2 was kind of the same way, but they never really gave you a vehicle that gives you a chance to find out just how small the 2 planets actually are. Although both of those maps are definitely bigger than what existed in Phantasy Star 1. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say is, this desert is boring as hell. Maybe that was the point, to create the unique feeling of being lost in the desert even with a map. I don't know, but I feel like the map could have been made a bit smaller and given a bit more interesting geography, and would have saved some space that could have been used to actually tell a story, as opposed to what we have had so far, which is wandering around looking for robots. Twice now, by the way, because you had to find a robot to get into the boat in the first area, to get the sapphire, to get to the second area, and then from the second area into the third area, and now we're looking for a robot called Ren. In the town by the river, there are some NPCs there that talk about Ren, an android that works with the weather control system. Some are characteristically cryptic about the whole thing. It happens in all 90s RPGs. But then there's this guy who just states the next game objective. Thanks. He's in a cave to the west. Cool. And now, since I'll talk about the way there, I should mention that this is where it really starts feeling like the enemy designs are getting weirder. There's an enemy called a Giant that appears to be a colorful extra from an Elton John music video, and then there's this weird head thing. They kind of remind me of Shin Megami Tensei demons, which makes it seem less like I'm fighting a thing and more like fighting a concept. Now, in the west, I found 2 cave entrances. I went into the one on the right, but that one really quickly destroyed me, so I had to retreat, which is also when I had to go to work. Once again, that leaves me with a lot of feelings that I can process in the down moments of an 8-hour shift. It was during this shift that occurred to me, no one's making me do this. I'm only doing this to myself. I don't have a massive audience. I could skip this one, and it might be years before anyone would ever notice and say, hey, what about Phantasy Star 3? And as it stands, I'm just making a video that's been done time and time again, deconstructing a dislike of this video game. And then I had a realization of what exactly this game is. Let's recap what Phantasy Star 3 is, shall we? It's an RPG made by a relatively small, incredibly inexperienced team of developers with big ideas. They end up having to abandon many of those ideas due to space constraints, or that they simply aren't experienced enough to work around it, leaving the final product with only a shell of those ideas that they couldn't execute on. With that, I understand what this is. This is a first-time RPG Maker project. And with that thought, my process kind of broke down. I thought back to myself the way it was stung to me when I received comments of indifference and disdain for my first big work, Sunset of the Elements. There weren't many. My game didn't reach many eyes, and the few I got really, really stung. Now, I can't imagine what it'd be like if, in 20 plus years, Sunset of the Elements was being subject to the microscope of dozens of retro gaming YouTubers. Maybe by then I wouldn't care, but there's still something that seems unfair to me about this whole thing. I've been comparing this game to Phantasy Star 2, which was also a mess in its own ways, but it came together because of the work of a veteran team, a veritable Sega Dream Team of the time, including Reiko Kodama and Yuji Naka. But this game was made by people who largely hadn't been in charge of making games before. Thinking about this like an RPG Maker project shifts the perspective dramatically. The maps are way too big. That's a common issue with RPG Maker games. It's a meme at this point, and it's largely because, well, the editing window of RPG Maker lets you zoom out a bit, and thus the window you're working with tends to be a lot bigger, make everything look smaller than it actually is. It's a very common issue. The cutscenes lack real direction and are literally just there standing and talking. That's a very big sign of a rookie developer. Again, I work in the RPG Maker space all the time. I see this all the time. Um, these are parts that should have been corrected by senior developers inside of Sega, but they weren't. The character designer for this game called it homespun. This is basically an indie project by any measure I can think of besides the company name attached to it. So, what if we do look at this as a rookie project? What can be learned? I think the first lesson to be learned from this project is to consider your limitations during the designing stage. A lot of musical and narrative ideas were cut due to limited space on the cartridge. So when you do have to cut things, try to make them feel natural and not like something is missing. This game treats its branching narrative as a draw, but there isn't much narrative. There isn't really much there. It feels hollow. Another lesson is that practice makes perfect. The composer for this game hadn't made a video game track before Phantasy Star 3, but then they went on to be one of the people who made music for Phantasy Star 4, which were much more pleasant and worked a lot better overall. The director for this game went on to be a planner for Panzer Dragoon, as well as being part of many other projects in a variety of roles. Unfortunately, those are really the only examples I was able to find. Most of this dev team never reached anything resembling the limelight, which is true of the vast majority of game developers in general. It doesn't necessarily mean this was the last game they made, or was the only one that they made. It's just hard to attach their names to something else, and even, well, especially with this era of RPGs, there's the question of if that's even their real names. That's always just a question about it. Now, judging this as an indie project still leaves the fact that, well, the game isn't very appealing to most people. From the menu quirks and grating soundtrack to the infamous backtracking that I didn't really get to in this video, most modern audiences aren't going to want to play this game, and that includes me. I didn't actually beat this game. I don't hate it enough to say that I'll never beat it, but I want to make videos about the main series in release order, and this is serving as a really big roadblock to me, talking about a bunch of really cool games that I've already played and have a lot to say about, and enjoyed a lot more than this game. So I kind of pivoted to this whole bit about being an indie game. And while that might sound like me admitting to a cop-out, this was actually an angle I had thought of before even starting this script. I just hadn't found the words, and after playing it for a few hours and really getting to know it, I was like, oh, okay, I have an idea. I can combine my kind of somewhat unique experiences here. Treating this as a modern indie, there are still aspects I'd say are pretty solid. The character design specifically is pretty good, although I have to point out the old Reese portrait. I think that's hilarious. If this weren't a Phantasy Star game, I'd think that the way that this game delineates a very old fantasy style for a lot of its characters with straight up cyborgs and techno tunnels would be pretty novel. And even among Phantasy Star entries, this is a relatively unique way to do it. it's not exactly the best executed of the Phantasy Star sort of balance that the franchise handles throughout its entire span. Ultimately, I think the director was right when he said this game is more like a spin-off. I haven't covered any of the actual spin-offs yet, and this can almost be considered the first. If I were to make a ranking of all the Phantasy Star games I've played up until now, this would be at the bottom. Above all the games I've ever played, probably only in the lower half. I can't express it, but there are qualities of this game that I do enjoy, and they really defy explanation or logical thinking from my brain. So ultimately, I think if I give Phantasy Star 2 a 4 out of 10, I can really only give this a 3 out of 10. I don't actively enjoy playing it, but there's definitely fun to be had, though I realize I didn't even really make it more than a third of the way through the game for this video. Uh, Even less if you consider the fact that there's like branches and shit that I never touched, not at all. Anyway, up next is Phantasy Star 4, which is such a mood swing from this game in terms of the popular opinion and my own opinion. Well, I'll see you then, but until that time, stay safe out there and take care of each other, because no one should be alone when the going gets rough.